At 66 years old, I signed the divorce papers with a steady hand and a broken heart. They celebrated right in front of me, as if I were a problem that had finally been solved. They thought I would leave with my head hanging low, with nothing, without strength, without a voice. But what happened in the hours that followed left that entire family in absolute shock. Because what nobody knew was who I truly was before I ever stepped foot in that house. But before we continue, make sure you're already subscribed to the channel and let us know in the comments, where are you watching this video from? We love knowing how far our stories are reaching. The county clerk's office in Chicago closes at 5 in the afternoon, but on that October day, it felt like time had stood still inside. The stamp hit the paper with a dry, almost violent thud, and it was as if that sound echoed inside my chest, continuing to reverberate even after the silence returned. 7 years. 7 years inside that house, trying to be good enough for a family that never truly wanted me. 7 years swallowing comments that hurt, putting up with smiles that never quite reached their eyes, and enduring the constant feeling of being tolerated, never truly belonging. At 66, I found myself divorced for the second time in my life. But unlike my first divorce, which came after a long and honest history with George, this divorce had a different flavor. It was bitter and hot, like coffee left burning on the stove. The kind of thing you know is necessary, but it hurts in a very specific way, the way it hurts when you tried with everything you had and it still wasn't enough. Robert, my ex-husband, wasn't even there for the signing. He sent his attorney in his place. That said it all. Over 7 years of marriage, I had learned to read between the lines to find what he lacked the courage to say to my face. He was a man who preferred silence over difficult conversations, who chose comfort over the truth, who hid behind his family when things got complicated. On that day, the message was clear: I wasn't even worth the discomfort of a goodbye. Outside the courthouse, his daughter, Sarah, was waiting for me with her arms crossed and a smirk she could barely hide. By my side was only my brown leather bag, old and faithful like a good friend. This bag had traveled with me to Europe when I was 58, it had carried important documents, it had been there for the moments that actually mattered. It was the right bag for that day. I felt Sarah's eyes sweeping me up and down, looking for signs of defeat, searching for a quiver in my lips, the slumped shoulders of a loser, the red eyes of someone who had spent the night crying. She didn't find what she was looking for. Sarah was 41, and from day one, she looked at me the way you look at an intruder in your own home. To her, I was the woman who had swooped into her widowed father's life to steal what belonged to the family. It didn't matter that I had arrived with genuine love. It didn't matter that I had taken care of Robert when he fell ill in our 3rd year of marriage, spending sleepless nights checking his temperature and changing out cold compresses. It didn't matter that I had given up my own routine, the closeness to my adult children who lived in New York City, my plans to travel more, and my hard-won independence. To Sarah, to the oldest son David, to my mother-in-law Eleanor, who was still alive at 84 and ruled everything with her set-in-stone opinions, I was just an interloper with an expiration date. And now, I had expired. She stepped closer as I walked out into the hallway and said in a low, almost whispered voice, like someone who doesn't want witnesses but wants to make absolutely sure the message is received, "You can leave now. There's nothing of yours here anymore." I looked at her for a few seconds. I didn't answer. I didn't argue back, I didn't defend myself, I didn't let a single muscle in my face show what I was feeling inside. I simply opened my brown bag, calmly pulled out my cell phone, and dialed a number I had kept in my heart like a promise. 3 rings. A voice I hadn't heard in a while but recognized as if it were my own, my oldest son, Henry, the executive director of the largest real estate development firm in the Midwest. A man I raised single-handedly after I was widowed, who went to college on a scholarship when money was tight, who had worked odd jobs since he was 18 without ever feeling ashamed, and who had gotten to where he was with his own 2 hands and the stubbornness he inherited from me. Hands that I once held in the maternity ward in Aurora, trembling with equal parts joy and fear. "Mom, did it work out?" His voice was calm. It always was when he was sure of something. "It did, son. It's over." Sarah was standing a few feet away, pretending to scroll on her phone. But she was listening. I knew she was listening, and I didn't care. After 7 years of learning to be invisible in that family, the time had come to be seen. Henry just said, "Stay right there. I'm sending the car." When I hung up, Sarah looked up from her phone. There was something different in my face now, and she sensed it, even without understanding what it was. There is a curious thing I've learned in 66 years of life: people who try to belittle you always assume you have nothing left besides them. That what they took from you is all you had. That blindness is their biggest mistake. But I was never just Robert's wife. Before walking into that house, I was Claire Miller, a retired college professor after a 32-year career, the author of 2 books on inclusive education that were still used as references in graduate programs, a mother of 3 children raised with clear values, a woman who had navigated widowhood with dignity and rebuilt her own life with her own hands. I entered that marriage out of love, with my eyes open and my heart available. And I left with my eyes even wider open, with a clarity that pain sometimes brings when you don't run away from it. Henry's car arrived in less than 20 minutes. A discreet car, nothing flashy, but immaculate and quiet. The driver got out and opened the door for me with a simple kindness that made me swallow the lump trying to rise in my throat. Sarah stood frozen on the sidewalk, watching. I got into the car without looking back. But right before the driver closed the door, I heard Sarah say to someone on the phone, her voice heavy with poorly disguised relief, "It's over. She's gone. Now the family business is all ours." I closed my eyes as the car glided through the streets of Chicago, the afternoon sun hitting the windows at an angle, the city moving at its own pace, completely indifferent to my personal drama. The family business. If she only knew. If any of them knew what had been sitting for 15 years in perfectly organized files in Attorney Davis's desk drawer. But it was too early for explanations. First, I needed to breathe. To let the afternoon sun warm my face and slowly release the weight of the last 7 years I had carried on my shoulders without realizing how much it had bowed my spine. Henry's house had that good kind of silence, the kind that doesn't feel heavy, that doesn't demand anything from you. The front yard had a maple tree he had planted when he bought the house. It had been thin back then, but now it was tall and generous. When I walked through the door, the smell was of woodwood and coffee, a combination that reminded me of the house I grew up in. Henry was waiting in the living room, standing by the window with his hands in his pockets, holding on to that serious demeanor he inherited from me for the moments that count. He looked me up and down like someone checking to see if something expensive had survived a fall. Then he hugged me without saying a word. That hug lasted longer than usual, one of those hugs that is an entire conversation without words, saying I'm here and you weren't alone in this all at once. When we pulled away, his eyes were glassy, but he didn't let the tear fall. He got that from me, too. We Millers cry on the inside before we cry on the outside, and sometimes the outside never comes. I sat on the couch, and he brought coffee. I held the mug with both hands, watching the steam rise slowly, thinking about how to tell him what I needed to tell him. Not the divorce itself. That was the easy part, the part that was already handled. The complicated part was everything that would come next, the conversation I had postponed for 7 years, not out of cowardice, but because the right time had never arrived. I need to tell you something about Robert's company, I said. Henry crossed his arms and leaned against the kitchen doorframe, listening with his whole body, just like he always did. Go ahead, Mom. I took a deep breath and began. 5 years before I married Robert, he had approached me as a business partner, not as a suitor. His small construction supply company, Hayes Construction, was sinking in accumulated debt after a poorly planned expansion. A mutual friend introduced us at a business meeting in Chicago, on a Friday afternoon that I almost canceled because I was so exhausted from a heavy week of lectures. At the time, I was carefully managing the mutual funds and life insurance George had left me when he died of a massive heart attack at 54, leaving everything perfectly in order, just as he always did. It was a nest egg I had grown over 8 years with patience, reading, consulting experts, making decisions on my own, and learning from mistakes without letting them destroy me. Robert showed me the numbers for Hayes Construction with the confidence of a man used to being taken seriously in boardrooms. I listened closely, asked questions that clearly caught him off guard, asked for 3 days to review the paperwork, and then made my decision with my head, not my heart. I invested an amount that saved the company from bankruptcy. I came in as a partner with a 35% stake. Robert kept 50%, and the remaining 15% was split between 2 minor partners who left 2 years later for personal reasons, transferring their shares entirely to me through a legally binding, notarized contract. When I married Robert, 2 years after that initial investment, I already owned 50% of Hayes Construction. Absolutely equal parts. But nobody in his family knew. Robert never told his children, never mentioned it to Eleanor, never brought it up at a single Sunday dinner. And I, who had entered the marriage wanting to be loved as a woman and not respected out of contractual obligation, also kept quiet. It was a choice I felt made sense at the time, but one I now recognized as the biggest mistake I made in this whole story. Henry stayed quiet for what felt like a very long time. He stared at the floor with the expression of someone processing a piece of information that changes the angle of everything. Mom, you own 50% of a company valued at over $4.3 million, and they have no idea. I nodded. He closed his eyes for a second. When he opened them, there was a different light in them, not of triumph, but of relief. Like someone finding out that the person they loved had been protected all along, even when they seemed defenseless. And does Attorney Davis already know everything? He's known everything for 15 years. The paperwork is in order, audited, indisputable. I already spoke with him this week. We are ready to present it during the division of assets. Henry stood up and walked over to the window. He stood with his back to me for a moment. When he turned around, there was a gleam in his eyes that I had only seen a few times in his life: when he graduated, when his first daughter was born, when he paid off his mortgage. "You waited all these years." "I didn't wait on purpose," I corrected him. "I just never found a strong enough reason to reveal it. Until today." The reason had finally come when Sarah looked at me in the courthouse hallway and told me I had nothing left with that family. When she said those words with the lightness of someone tossing away something useless, something inside me finally relaxed. Like when the rope you've been gripping too tightly for too long finally gives way, not because you gave up, but because it was time. That night, I had dinner with Henry and my daughter-in-law Jessica, who looked at me with a careful tenderness, like someone who doesn't want to overdo it but wants you to know you are seen. The table was set beautifully, with the linen tablecloth she saves for important guests. There was vegetable soup, artisan bread, and a mixed green salad with croutons. Simple things, prepared with care. I went to the guest room Henry had set up for me with fresh sheets and a pitcher of water on the nightstand. I lay there in the dark with my eyes open, listening to the crickets in the yard outside, and thought about Robert. Not with anger, but with a kind of serene sadness, like looking at a photograph from a trip that wasn't worth the effort but taught you something anyway. I thought about the first time he brought me flowers. The way he laughed when he was in a good mood, tossing his head back. How, for the first 2 years, he seemed genuinely happy with me. Then something shifted. Or maybe it had never been any different, and I just hadn't wanted to see it. I closed my eyes. Tomorrow a new conversation would begin. One I had waited long enough to have. The meeting with Attorney Davis happened early on a Thursday, in a glass-walled conference room in downtown Chicago overlooking Michigan Avenue. Henry came with me and sat beside me without speaking, just being present, like a quiet anchor. Mr. Davis placed the folder on the table with the calm demeanor of someone completely confident in what he holds. He was a man with stark white hair, thin glasses, and a measured voice, discreet and precise, the kind of person who projects competence without ever needing to announce it. We had worked together for almost 15 years, and I considered him one of the few men I had learned to trust implicitly. He laid out the scenario clearly. The partnership documents for Hayes Construction would be formally presented during the divorce's division of assets. The company had been evaluated by an independent appraiser at $4,300,000. My 50% was documented, audited, notarized, and there was no legal argument that could dismantle it. 15 years of well-kept paperwork is a fortress that no amount of emotion can tear down. When he finished, I simply said, "You may proceed." That very afternoon, Sarah's phone must have rung with the news. Because 2 hours later, my phone lit up with her number flashing on the screen. I didn't answer. She called 3 times in a row. On the 4th try, she sent a text message that I read calmly, sitting on Henry's back porch with a mug of chamomile tea in my hands, watching the sunflowers in the garden swaying gently in the breeze. The text read, "We need to talk urgently. There is a mistake in the divorce papers." It wasn't a mistake. It was the reality they had never wanted to know. I put my phone away and went back to looking at the garden. Those yellow sunflowers were wide open on that October afternoon, acting as if they didn't know the world could sometimes be cruel and complicated. There was something comforting about their ignorance. I thought about how many times, inside that house, I had swallowed situations that hurt me deeply. Eleanor saying right in front of me, loud enough to make sure I heard, that a second wife never brings peace to a home. David coming over on weekends and greeting me with a stiff nod, no name, no eye contact, treating me like part of the furniture. Sarah reorganizing the kitchen I had just arranged, without telling me, just redoing everything her way, as if my presence in that space was temporary. And it was temporary, but not in the way she imagined. They were small, everyday cruelties, the kind that don't have a name and don't seem massive, but over the years build an entire architecture of invisibility around a person. You wake up one day and realize you've stopped taking initiative because someone will always undo it. You stop giving opinions because nobody asks. You stop telling stories about your own life because people's eyes glaze over when you speak. Added up over 7 years, those little things weigh heavier than any single, glaring injustice. The next day, Sarah showed up at Henry's house unannounced. Henry told me later that she had buzzed the intercom with a voice he described as someone trying to sound calm but clearly failing. I went down to the sidewalk. She was standing there in dark sunglasses, her hair flawlessly pulled back, wearing that rigid perfection she always used as armor. When she saw me, she took off her glasses. It was the first time in 7 years I had seen Sarah without her mask of coldness. She was genuinely terrified. I didn't rejoice in it, but I also didn't pretend I didn't notice. She said there was a misunderstanding with the paperwork, that her dad had never given me half the company, that it was the family business, built on years of dreams and hard work, that there had to be something wrong with all of this. I listened to her patiently and without interrupting. When she finished, I spoke slowly, weighing every word. "Sarah, the documents are 15 years old. They were notarized before our marriage, before your father and I were anything more than business partners. There is no misunderstanding. She went quiet. I continued, when I bought into this company, it was in debt. I brought the capital that saved it from a bankruptcy your father feared but didn't know how to avoid. I didn't do it behind anyone's back. I did it with a signed contract, an attorney, a notary public, and everything the law requires. I just didn't announce it to the family because it was business between adults, and because, when I became your stepmother, I chose not to use it as a bargaining chip. Sarah opened her mouth, then closed it. She looked around like someone searching for an exit. But Dad never told us. I know, I said. And that is a conversation you need to have with him. Not with me. She walked away without fully turning her back at first, stepping away slowly, like someone still processing news too massive to absorb all at once. I stayed on the sidewalk for a moment after she turned the corner, feeling the crisp October breeze sweep down the street, carrying away some of the last remnants of guilt I had still been holding on to. Robert called me 3 days after Sarah's visit. I answered because, despite everything, he had been my husband for 7 years. Because I had once genuinely loved the man. And because, the way I was raised, you still give someone the chance to be honest before cutting off communication completely. His voice sounded different. Quieter, smaller. Gone was that booming confidence that had charmed me in the beginning, a confidence I had gradually recognized over the years as just a surface, not a depth. He asked if I was really going to move forward with the division of assets as documented. I said yes. He was quiet for a while. Then he made a proposal. He would pay me the value of my shares in monthly installments, so he wouldn't have to sell the company or drag the family through a long, exhausting legal battle. I listened to all of it. Then I said, Robert, you have an attorney. My attorney is also available. Any proposals can be made through the proper channels, in writing, with full transparency. He said my name with that tone that used to disarm me back in the day, that tone of intimacy creating the illusion that only the two of us understood the conversation. Claire. I didn't let my guard down. I said goodbye and hung up the phone. I sat there holding the phone for a moment, waiting to feel something that never came. Waiting for the urge to call him back. Waiting for the guilt. Waiting for that old voice inside me that had spent 7 years saying it's okay, we can do it your way, you don't need to worry. But none of that came. What came instead was a memory from the 4th year of our marriage, when I got sick with pneumonia and was stuck in bed for almost 3 weeks, unable to stand up without getting dizzy. Robert got impatient. Not in an explicitly cruel way, but with that silent irritation of someone who isn't used to having to organize their life around someone else. Eleanor came to visit me once and said, while aggressively yanking the duvet straight like she was mad at the blankets, an older woman really needs to take better care of her health, because she's becoming a burden on her husband. I was 62 and I had pneumonia. Pneumonia doesn't care about your age, nor does it care about anyone's convenience. Robert slept in his home office for the first few days, claiming my coughing was keeping him awake. He left me with a ginger ale and a tin of saltines on the nightstand and walked out. Henry found out about it somehow, a way I never quite explained to him. Maybe he just heard it in my voice when I called to tell him I was sick. He drove up from Indianapolis without me asking, making the 4-hour drive on a Friday night, arriving with a bag full of medicine, soup ingredients, and his own pillow from home. He spent 4 days sleeping in the guest room next door. When he left, he taped a list to the fridge with the phone numbers of 3 trusted doctors, the nearest 24-hour pharmacy, and a mobile lab that did at-home blood work. His own number was circled in red at the top of the list, with a handwritten note, "Anytime, Mom." On that day, feeling the weight of that memory as I held the phone after hanging up on Robert, I understood something that had taken a long time to become clear: love that doesn't protect you isn't enough to build a home. That night, my daughter Rachel called from New York City. She lives there with her husband and my 2 grandchildren, Peter and Lily, who are my most direct and loudest source of joy. Rachel is 43 and has this blunt energy that sometimes exhausts me and sometimes saves me. She inherited her father's ability to get straight to the point without beating around the bush, and my stubbornness to never drop a subject until she completely understands it. She asked how I was doing. I told her I was fine, calm, without any drama. She was quiet for a second. Then she said with that affectionate precision she uses when she's being serious, "Mom, are you sure? Because, fine, coming from your mouth can mean a lot of different things depending on the day." I laughed. Laughing felt good, a real laugh that slipped out without me having to force it. I told her I was truly fine. Not the fine of someone pretending so they don't worry the people they love, but the fine of someone who has walked through a storm, gotten completely drenched, and is now looking at the clear sky on the other side, clothes still dripping but heartbeat steady and footing firm. She listened. Then she said, in that definitive way of hers, "All right then. But I want to see this with my own eyes." She wanted to come visit immediately. I let her. Honestly, I wanted her to come very badly, needing it more than I had even admitted to myself, but I needed her to offer it first. I'm still learning how to ask for things, even from my own children. I'm still learning that asking for help isn't the same as admitting weakness. Sometimes, it's the exact opposite. Rachel arrived on a Friday with 2 suitcases, a backpack full of the kids' stuff, and the 2 grandkids, who lit up Henry's house in a way I hadn't realized it needed lighting up. Peter is 12, with that awkward preteen strength where he hugs you with his whole body without quite knowing what to do with his arms. Lily is 8, and she walked in handing me a drawing she had made during the drive, sitting in the back seat with her notebook balanced on her knees. It was me, drawn with massive white hair, a blue dress, and a smile that took up the entire bottom half of my face, disproportionately happy and absolutely perfect. I folded the drawing carefully and tucked it inside my brown leather bag. That weekend was the first one in a long time where I didn't think about Robert, Sarah, paperwork, or legal battles. I played cards with Peter until he beat me 3 times in a row, pretending to keep his pride in check. I taught Lily how to make fudge using my mother's recipe, which nobody uses anymore because it requires stirring the pot way longer than people have the patience for nowadays, but which results in a treat unlike anything store-bought. I sat with Rachel on the porch after the kids went to sleep, the city noise far away and our conversation close, and we stayed up until almost midnight talking the way a mother and daughter do when they finally stop trying to protect each other. She asked me if I regretted marrying Robert. I thought honestly before answering, because she deserved honesty and not just a pretty answer. I told her no. That I went into the marriage with my eyes open and an available heart, and neither of those things is a mistake in and of itself. The mistake was staying quiet for so long about what was hurting me, confusing patience with resignation, thinking that enduring things in silence was a form of love when it was actually a way of erasing myself. But the choice to love, the courage to try again after being widowed, that, I didn't regret. Rachel looked at me with her head slightly tilted, the way she does when she's truly listening, not just drafting her response while I speak. So, what now? She asked. Now, I live, I said. Simple as that. No grandiose plans, no list of goals, no personal reinvention program. Just live. Wake up early because I like the morning silence. Drink my coffee slowly because I have the time. Read the books that have been sitting on my shelf because life inside that house never left me quiet enough to focus. The Monday after Rachel left, I received formal notice from Attorney Davis. Robert's family had filed a motion contesting the asset division. It was entirely expected. Lawyers were hired, arguments were drafted, and the bureaucratic machine started grinding with that signature slowness that sometimes protects you and sometimes makes you sick. I didn't let it shake me. There is something liberating about knowing you are right with documentation, dates, signatures, and notary stamps that don't lie and don't suffer from selective memory. Their contestation was built on the argument that the company had always belonged to the family and that my ownership stake was an anomaly. But anomaly is a word that only works when the paperwork doesn't exist. Mine existed, and it was 15 years old. Mr. Davis called me late in the afternoon with an update and said, near the end of the call, with that calm tone of someone who has worked hard to build trust, in 20 years of practicing law, I rarely see a case this well documented. Did you plan this from the beginning? I thought before answering. I didn't plan it, I said. But I learned early on that a signed contract doesn't lie, and an organized desk drawer sleeps soundly. My mother taught me that. My mother, Martha, had passed away at 81, leaving everything exactly in its right place. She was a woman who never studied past elementary school but understood that documents are memory, and memory is power, especially for a woman on her own, especially for a woman the world constantly insists on underestimating. That day, feeling the solid weight of the paperwork I had guarded for 15 years, I realized I carried a piece of her in every decision I made. The legal process dragged on for 2 full months. There were meetings at Mr. Davis's office, signatures at the notary, reports from forensic accountants, and financial statements from Hayes Construction bouncing back and forth between lawyers like a conversation needing many rounds before reaching an agreement. Sarah tried to contact me twice during that period. The first time, she sent a distant cousin of Robert's whom I barely knew, a man in his 60s wearing an ill-fitting sport coat, delivering a clearly rehearsed speech about family, fresh starts, and how life is too short for fighting. I listened politely until he finished, then told him that any concrete proposals needed to go through my lawyer. The second time, she was more direct. She sent a long text message, with paragraphs that had clearly been written and rewritten multiple times, holding that specific texture of words chosen far too carefully. She talked about her childhood, watching her dad work, her biological mother who had died when Sarah was 16. She talked about how that company was more than just money to her, it was continuity, it was her father's presence in every brick delivered, it was proof that William Hayes's legacy actually meant something. I read the whole thing, twice. And I understood that she wasn't wrong to feel the way she did. Her pain was real. Her attachment was real, deeply rooted in a loss I had never experienced in the same way. But one person's pain does not erase another person's rights. And the fact that she had treated me like an intruder for 7 years didn't erase the 15 years that company had survived partially on my capital and my risk. I replied in a few short lines. I told her I understood the emotional weight she was describing. I told her I wasn't entering this process as anyone's enemy, but as a business partner who had legal rights to protect. And I said I hoped that, with time, she would be able to separate what was feeling from what was fact, because both exist at the same time but cannot be handled in the same way. She didn't reply. That week, I went to Mass for the first time since all of this began. The little church near Henry's house was small and old, made of dark stone, with leaded stained glass windows that let colorful light spill in on sunny mornings. The wooden pews creaked. The priest had the voice of someone who actually believes what he's saying. I sat in the back and stayed in silence for a long time before the service started. I didn't pray for a favorable outcome in the lawsuit. I prayed for clarity, and I prayed that I would make it through all of this without turning hard, which is my biggest fear in difficult situations. Not the money, not the victory. It's coming out the other side hardened and cold, letting the people who tried to belittle me successfully change who I am on the inside. I don't want to turn to stone. I want to remain the same woman who makes fudge with her granddaughter paying closer attention than the recipe requires, who loses at cards gracefully, who cries at the end of a cheesy movie on a Friday night without feeling embarrassed about it. After Mass, I stopped at a corner shop and ate a slice of cheese pizza standing at the counter, just like I used to do when I was young, living alone in downtown Aurora in a tiny apartment that smelled like plaster and possibility. Back then, I was freshly graduated, terrified, and full of plans that didn't even have names yet. I ate standing up because I didn't own a kitchen table yet. I thought that owning a table would be the beginning of everything. It took me a long time to understand that the beginning of everything was already happening while I was eating pizza without a table. The girl at the register was in her 20s, she handed me my change with a genuine smile and said, "Have a good day, ma'am." I told her I was going to. And when I said it, I truly believed it, without even having to convince myself. The settlement was finalized on a December afternoon, 3 months after the divorce. Robert and I never saw each other face to face during the entire process. Everything was handled by the lawyers, as it should be when two people have already said all they had to say and all that remains are numbers needing a signature. The payout would be made in 4 quarterly installments, according to a proposal Mr. Davis drafted after analyzing the company's cash flow. It wasn't what I would have received in an immediate buyout, but it was fair under the circumstances, and it spared me from a lengthy trial that would cost me time and energy I preferred to invest in other things. I signed without hesitating. When I walked out of Attorney Davis's office that afternoon, the Chicago sky was that intense shade of blue that only happens in December, a blue that looks painted on purpose, filled with excess intention and generosity. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment just looking up, letting the sun warm my face. Henry was waiting for me in the car. When I got in, he looked at me. "Is it over?" he asked. "It's over," I said. He didn't celebrate. Neither did I. We looked at each other for a second with that unspoken communication that exists between people who know each other deeply, where you don't need to explain the gravity of what just happened. Then he started the car and we drove away. That weekend, Rachel came back with the kids, and Daniel, my youngest son, who lives in Columbus, Ohio, came too. It took Daniel a little longer to grasp everything that had happened because he's always preferred not to know about complications, preferring to look at life sideways so he doesn't have to face it head on. Daniel is 38 and has this indirect way about him that sometimes worries me and sometimes charms me. But he showed up, uninvited, and that meant a lot. We had a big lunch at Henry's house. Everyone brought something. Jessica made a classic Sunday pot roast that had the whole house smelling wonderful since morning. Rachel brought homemade buttermilk biscuits from a bakery she discovered in New York, defending them with the fervor of someone who has uncovered a universal truth. Daniel brought craft beer and that slightly sheepish smile of someone who arrived without doing much but is fully prepared to wash the dishes at the end. I sat at the table looking at my 3 children, at my 2 grandkids fighting over the last biscuit in the basket, at Jessica serving more roast without anyone having to ask, and I felt something I couldn't exactly name in that moment but recognized later as gratitude. Not the performative gratitude people declare in speeches, but the quiet gratitude that settles in your chest like a good weight and stays there. During lunch, Daniel asked me in a low voice, taking advantage of a moment when the others were distracted, if I was truly okay or if I was holding something back. He always knew me better than he let on. I told him I was truly okay. That the last few months had been exhausting in the way that only long, emotionally charged situations can be, but that exhausting wasn't the same thing as destructive. That I had walked away from that marriage with less than I went in with in some aspects, certainly fewer illusions, but that a lost illusion is just reality arriving late. He kept looking at me with that serious expression that rarely ever graced his face. "Mom, you are the weirdest," calmest person I know in the middle of a storm." I laughed. I told him it was because I had lived through enough storms to know they pass. They always pass. And what is left behind, provided you didn't lose yourself along the way, is usually cleaner than what was there before. That night, after everyone went home, I sat in my room and opened the notebook I had started writing in during those months. Not a diary, exactly, but a place to put the thoughts that grew too large to keep solely in my head. I read a few pages from the beginning. The writing was tense, the sentences short, holding the tone of someone walking on uncertain ground without knowing where to step. There was an entry from November that simply read, "Today I didn't cry, but I didn't smile either." As if the middle was the safest place to stay. Then it started opening up, getting longer, calmer, like the breathing of someone finding their rhythm again after running too far. There was an entry from December that filled 3 whole pages, a sort of letter I had written to the version of myself who had entered that marriage 7 years ago. Not a letter of reprimand. A letter of understanding. Because that woman did what she knew how to do with what she had in her hands, and that needs to be respected even when the outcome isn't what we hoped for. I wrote before going to sleep, "This isn't what I expected for my life at 66. But surprises are part of what makes life interesting, and sometimes, it's exactly the surprise that reminds us we are still truly alive. That we are still capable of feeling, making mistakes, getting back up, and choosing differently the next time." January arrived with a fine, persistent rain, the kind that isn't a downpour but slowly soaks everything left outside. The first installment of the settlement was deposited into my account on a Thursday morning, while I was drinking my coffee, warming both hands on the mug and looking out the window at the drenched yard. I opened my banking app almost automatically, like someone checking something they already know but just need to see. I saw the number, closed the app, and finished my coffee. I didn't feel anything grandiose. There was no reason to. It was just confirmation that what is yours comes back to you when you don't give up fighting for it with the right tools, at the right time, with enough patience to wait for the moment that needs to be waited for. I spoke with Attorney Davis about the options for that money. Invest a portion, save another, and set aside a small amount for something that had been tucked away for years like a delayed promise, a trip to Europe. I had promised myself when I was widowed that I would go to Paris. Then time kept passing, life kept happening, Robert entered the picture, and those plans were shelved with that gentle slowness with which we let go of our own things when we are too busy trying to fit into a life that wasn't built for our size. The right time was now. I told Henry I was traveling alone. He made that worried son face that sometimes makes me feel like the world has flipped upside down and he's the one raising me now. He looked at me with that controlled seriousness. "Mom, by yourself?" "By myself," I confirmed. "I'm 66 years old, I raised 3 children, I managed an estate for decades, I survived 2 marriages and a 3-month legal battle. I think I can make it to Paris and back without needing an escort." He laughed. A loud, real laugh, the kind that escapes without permission. The exact same laugh he had when he was a boy and I'd say something that caught him off guard. That laugh of a son recognizing his mother. "Have you booked the hotel yet?" he asked, trying to recover his seriousness. "I've booked it," I said. "And I've researched the restaurants. And I checked out a pocket guidebook from the library last week." He just stared at me with that mix of admiration and surrender that I love so much in him, the look of someone realizing they've lost an argument that didn't even get to start. Before leaving, I did something I had put off. I went to the cemetery to visit George. I brought white chrysanthemums, which were his favorite. He always said they were honest flowers because they never tried to be something they weren't. I sat on the stone bench next to his grave and stayed quiet for a while, the weak January sun warming my shoulder. It wasn't a visit born of paralyzing grief. It was an accountability check. As if I needed to tell him, and myself, that everything he had left in my hands, the assets he built with hard work and that I continued to manage with the same dedication, had been handled with care and dignity. That I hadn't squandered the trust he placed in me when he left. I think he would have agreed with everything I did. I think he would have laughed that wide laugh of his knowing I had kept the partnership documents hidden for 15 years while Robert's family treated me like a temporary passenger. George always said there was more to me than met the eye, that my calm demeanor fooled people because they couldn't see the depth underneath. Maybe he was right. Maybe I only realized it too late to be fairer to myself inside that marriage. I stood up, arranged the flowers in the metal vase anchored in the dirt, and walked away slowly, the afternoon sun warming my back. The trip to Paris lasted 10 days, and each day was different from the last. I went alone, and I went whole, without leaving any part of myself behind out of fear or obligation. I walked through Montmartre until my feet ached after miles of walking, my heart completely satisfied. I ate grilled fish in a bistro so tiny the waiters kept bumping into each other between the tables, where they called me "darling" without a hint of irony. I climbed up to the Sacré-Cœur on a cloudy afternoon and looked out over the rust-colored rooftops and the Seine River down below, not thinking about anything in particular, which is a priceless kind of freedom I had forgotten existed. On a rainy afternoon, I ducked into a bookstore in the Latin Quarter for shelter and walked out with 3 books I picked out slowly, without rushing. One of them was a book of poems by a French writer I didn't recognize. I bought it because of the title, which I won't share because it's mine. When I got back to the hotel that night and read a few pages with the window cracked open to the rain outside, I found a line that I copied into my notebook in careful handwriting. What was mine returned differently. But it returned. I spent a long time staring at that line. Because it was never about the money. It wasn't about the company, or the asset division, or the 15-year-old document sitting in an organized drawer. It was about myself, about the Claire Miller who had walked into a family's home expecting to be welcomed as a human being and was instead reduced, over 7 years, to a quiet, exhausted version of herself. A version that cooked without complaining, swallowed insults without commenting, smiled when she wanted to cry, and stayed quiet when she wanted to speak. That Claire had returned differently. With more scars and more clarity, with less naivety about people and more patience with herself. With the scar in the right place, which is where you learn not to let yourself get hurt the exact same way twice. But she had returned whole. And that was the only victory that truly mattered. On the flight back, while Chicago appeared below us with its lights glowing in the night, I wrote the final lines in the notebook I had started on the day of the divorce. I wrote that I had finally understood, without an ounce of bitterness, that family is not a place where you constantly have to prove you deserve to be there. That love demanding the erasure of who you are isn't love, it's an occupation. That patience has a limit not because a person grew weak, but because a point is reached where continuing would mean betraying oneself. And that, when that point arrives, the most courageous thing a person can do is walk out with their head held high, their paperwork in order, and their brown leather bag slung over their shoulder. Henry was waiting for me at the airport with that serious look he saves for the moments that truly matter, the look of someone who showed up way earlier than necessary because he didn't want to risk being late. When he saw me coming through the arrivals gate with my rolling suitcase, my coat folded over my arm, and my notebook tucked under the other, he smiled. A smile I've known since he was 6 years old and brought home his first perfect score on a math test he wasn't expecting. "You look different," he said, using the voice of someone observing something they are still trying to put into words. "Different how?" I asked, stopping in front of him with my suitcase. "More like you," he answered. "More like the mom I know." And that was exactly it. That night, we had dinner together at his house, just the two of us, Henry and I, while the rest of the family respected that moment without anyone having to ask. Jessica left the food ready in the kitchen and went to give the kids a bath. We sat at the table with the window open to the yard, taking in the smell of wet earth after a late afternoon rain. My son looked at me and said, "You don't have to tell me anything right now if you don't want to." I told him I wanted to tell him everything. And I did. Paris, the streets, the line from the poem, the cemetery before leaving, the feeling of walking through an entire city without a single person knowing my name or what I had survived over the last few months. The highly specific freedom of being anonymous in a beautiful place. He listened to all of it without interrupting. When I finished, he just said, "Welcome back, Mom." Before going to sleep that night, I walked over to the bedroom window and looked out at the dark garden. The maple tree in the middle had glossy leaves from the rain, swaying slightly in the wind. I thought about the woman who had walked into that courthouse in October gripping her brown bag with both hands. I thought about the dry stamp hitting the paper. I thought about Sarah saying there's nothing of yours here anymore. And I thought about everything she had no idea existed. It wasn't triumph I felt. It was something simpler and longer lasting. It was the clarity of someone who made it to the other side of a difficult thing and realized she was still intact. That the crossing took a toll, but it didn't destroy me. That the hidden documents were important, but what I had guarded most carefully, throughout all those years, was myself. I closed the window. I turned off the light. And I slept with the peace of someone who had finally put everything back where it belonged. With no resentment burning in my chest like a hot coal. With no unspoken grievances turning to stone over time. Just the clean sensation of someone who walked through something incredibly hard with her head held high and discovered, on the other side, that she was still exactly who she was. That no dry stamp on a piece of paper, no family that didn't know how to welcome her, no cold smirk in a courthouse hallway had managed to take away what was truly hers. Because what was truly mine was never locked inside any drawer. It was inside me the entire time, just waiting for me to have enough courage to reclaim it. Now, if you enjoyed this story, click subscribe, and tell me in the comments, which part made your jaw drop? Oh, and don't forget to become a member for access to exclusive videos I don't post here. I'll see you there.